Well, here's my message to non-Muslims about Jordan Peterson's message to Muslims. In a single 6-minute, 51-second recording, Peterson manages to squeeze in every stupid white man's trope ever told about Islam, Muslims, and the Middle East. His message essentially boils down to this. Hey Muslims, stop fighting with each other, leave the Jews and Christians alone, your true enemy is within, so make new pen pals with your imagined and perceived enemies of Islam.
So, how about we all quit squabbling over trinkets and details and face the real problem?
Now, I would really love to know what these trinkets and details are. Are all of the conservatives over at Daily Wire, are they upset with the left over little trinkets and details? Or are their concerns legitimate? You brought up the Abraham Accords. Is the issue that Israelis have with Palestinians, are those just little trinkets and details? Should they just give the Palestinians what they want for the greater good? What about those trinkets and details that led to the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan? Do the people responsible for that deserve such a condescending lecture, or just the Muslims?
It is time for those of you in the Muslim world to stop fighting among yourselves, you Shiites and Sunnis.
I agree with that in general. You know, there is far too much infighting between Sunni and Shia Muslims, but I think that's as a result of the geopolitical events of the last century rather than an actual divide between Sunni and Shia Islam. I think Sunni and Shia Muslims have lived in peace for hundreds of years, centuries. But I agree with the sentiment that he's making. You know, we should stop fighting amongst ourselves.
In the aftermath of the extraordinary Abraham Accords, which have laid out the possibility for peace between all the people of the book.
He does make a major blunder here, yeah? Extraordinary. What do you mean extraordinary? I'd say it's the exact opposite. Normalizing relations with extreme Zionists is not the way forward. Because what are we telling other despotic regimes as well? That if you hang in long enough, if you have strong enough allies, if you're good at playing the media games, then you'll get away with it. It's clear Israel is on the warpath with not only Palestinians, but anyone who supports Palestinians as well. Anyone following the news on a daily basis there will know the amount of atrocities that happen, and social media is actively working on suppressing that as well.
Okay, let's get things straight. Number one, the bickering and hate you're referring to accounts for an incredibly small percentage of all Muslims. Number two, newsflash. It was actually the West that caused this hate and division between us when they realised how little power they had when the Muslims were unified. If you don't believe me, have a look at this RAND report, which was pushed out by the US government, strategizing how to cause conflict between the Muslims to divide them. And you'll see that the strategies in this document are being implemented by the West to this day. Do I need to remind you of the division and bloodshed that happened in the name of Christ, Peterson? Do I need to remind you of the atrocities happening in our countries right now as we speak because of the West? But you want to sit back, point fingers at the Muslims as if you're on some sort of high horse.
So tell me, Jordan, how does a Sunni in Iran or a Shiite in Saudi Arabia reach across to their sectarian counterparts when doing so will get them arrested for plotting a seditious conspiracy against their respective sectarian regimes? I mean, it's a little difficult for Sunnis to make friends with Shiites in Syria, given the Assad regime has spent the past decade ethnically cleansing Sunni Muslims and replacing them with Shia migrants from Iran and Lebanon to help keep the dictator in power. And tell me, Jordan, how do Muslims in Gaza reach out to the Jews in Israel when 2 million Palestinians are permanently caged in the world's largest open-air concentration camp by the apartheid Israeli regime, which so happens to be supported by the government of your country, Canada? But Peterson knows all this. He might not be the brightest bulb in the tanning bed, but he's not a total imbecile, so it's pretty obvious he's carrying the water for covert political aims.
Muslims, reach across the sectarian divide. Shiites, find a Sunni pen pal. Communicate with someone on the other side. Sunnis, do the same. And then, maybe, reach out, tentatively, to a Christian, or even, heaven forbid, a Jew.
Did you really have to say it like that? Seriously? And I feel like this is really a quintessential example of Jordan Peterson. He speaks with so much eloquence, people have so much hope for him. But then, at the end of it all, after all this buildup, his advice is clean your room. So here we are after this captivating video. What is the brilliant conclusion? What is the amazing piece of advice that Jordan Peterson has that he has to inform the Muslims of? They need this advice from him. He tells the Sunnis to get a Shiite pen pal. He tells us to talk to a Christian or even a Jew. Imagine that, Muslims talking to Jews. Well, the reality is, Muslims, both Sunni and Shiite, Christians, Jews, we all live together. We all know each other. We talk to each other. We don't always get along, but we get along good enough to the point where this is not the biggest issue that Muslims around the world are suffering from. Trust me, Jordan Peterson, I know Shiites, I know Jews, and I know Christians. I talk to all of them on a regular basis. If it was as easy as just becoming pen pals with these people, if that would solve all of the world's problems, trust me, we would do it instantly. But I'm sorry, these are not the biggest issues that Muslims face, nor are these solutions to our problems. As you said, evil ideologies are sweeping the world. And Muslims have been demonized for decades, portrayed as terrorists, portrayed as backwards and primitive. Muslim countries have been invaded. Muslim families have been rounded up and put in concentration camps. Many have been brainwashed into having this inferiority complex. So they're adopting these wicked values, hook, line, and sinker. And then you have the audacity to speak to us in this condescending tone.
Having said that, not only did your video make it seem like all the Muslims bicker, but your vile, condescending tone made it seem like the Muslims were the root of all problems in the world and that no other problems exist outside the Muslim world.
You see, Peterson wants you to believe that Muslims are backwards and barbaric, while white dudes just like him are educated, enlightened, and civilized. It's the great lie told by all colonial powers to justify the pacification and subjugation of those who stand in the way of our capitalist exploits and imperial projects. He wants you to believe European colonial powers never destroyed civic, social, and political life in the Muslim majority countries they once occupied. He also wants you to pretend that violence in Muslim majority countries is the product of ancient rivalries and not the legacy of colonial divide and rule strategies. So when he calls on Muslims to reach across the sectarian divide, it suggests he's never read a single book on the history of the Middle East, like ever.
I really just can't get over how condescending this is. Why doesn't Jordan Peterson just take his own advice and unite the political left and the political right? Why don't all you guys at Daily Wire reach out to some liberals? You, Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, you guys just come up with some sort of electronic system where the political left and the political right start communicating with each other and bam, America solved. Look, if you build it, get in touch with me. You'll figure out how to do it, and I'll publicize it.
Ask yourself, how about the peace treaties that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, implemented with the Jews? Does that sound like hate? How about the time before the West collapsed our Islamic civilization, where the Christians, yes, the Christians, decided to fight alongside the Muslims because of the benefits and perks they enjoyed under Islamic rulership? Isn't it crystal clear who the real peacemakers are, Peterson?
You gotta wonder then, how does he get to prance around the world as an intellectual without ever knowing the works of the great post-colonial writers such as Edward Said, Frantz Fanon, and Albert Memmi? But if somehow he accidentally trips on the sidewalk and falls face first into a library, he will learn that sectarianism in the Muslim world was harnessed and fueled by European colonial powers who sought to plunder Muslim lands by dividing and conquering indigenous Muslim populations. Divide and rule is how France conquered Syria in elevating the Shia Alawite minority to rule over the Sunni majority. And Britain did this in Iraq by privileging the Sunni minority to rule over the country's Shia majority. It's how we ended up with dictators Saddam Hussein and Bashar al-Assad. This is basic first-year undergraduate post-colonial stuff, but Peterson doesn't get it, even though he holds a PhD.
It is time for those of you in the Muslim world to stop fighting among yourselves, you Shiites and Sunnis, and also time to stop regarding the Christians, and even more specifically, the Jews, as your enemies.
Now let's just put the condescending tone to the side, which is blatantly apparent. But out of all the things Jordan Peterson could have said, what does he say? He says it's time for those of you in the Muslim world to stop fighting amongst yourselves, you Sunnis and Shiites. He didn't say, hey, you Israelis and Palestinians, stop fighting. No, he already showed his support for Israel. Not to mention, it's more complicated than just wagging your finger at people saying stop fighting. I mean, does he really think that this is the biggest problem Muslims are facing? It's the infighting between Sunnis and Shiites? And then he says it's time to stop regarding the Christians and Jews as enemies. Dr. Peterson, why are you saying this to the Muslims? Why don't you say that to the Christians who invaded Iraq and Afghanistan? Why don't you say that to the Jews taking over Palestine? Somehow Jordan Peterson feels that he can speak down to Muslims in this way. Stop you Sunnis and Shiites fighting. Stop taking Christians and Jews as your enemies. But then he has the audacity, as we'll see, to lecture us about spirituality, about evil.
And then maybe reach out tentatively to a Christian, or even, heaven forbid, a Jew.
I don't know why he says it like that, as if Muslims are against Jews. Look, we don't have a problem with Jews, yeah? I mean, history is testament to how Muslims, Jews, and Christians lived amicably together under Muslim rule. Our issue is Zionism. Unity means understanding the root causes that seek to divide us for profit, natural resources, power, influence, and then exposing them, mate. Not clapping our hands and saying, yeah, they've gotten away with that, yeah, Abraham Accords, and forwarding tropes like, yeah, Muslims and Jews, you got a problem, and ignoring Zionism.
Peterson knows he's being ridiculous. He's only repeating rehearsed lines given to him by the Israel lobby. And if somehow my radar is off, and he's not advancing the interests of Israel for personal gain, well, then he's even dumber than we thought. Because what we would have here is a rich white dude living securely in a safe and prosperous nation, urging Uyghur Muslims to make pen pals with the same Chinese people that are exterminating them in Xinjiang. He would also be encouraging Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar to make friends with the same Buddhist militias that murdered and raped more than 50,000 of their friends and family members. Yeah, and good luck getting Muslims in India and Kashmir to write sweet letters to the same Hindu nationalist forces that have pushed them to the brink of genocide. If he's not a paid agent of Israel, then he's just a total moron, which would explain why he dresses up his lies and ignorance with pseudo-intellectual gobbledygook to make you believe he actually knows what he's talking about.
All this is lovely to see in the aftermath of the extraordinary Abraham Accords, which have laid out the possibility for peace between all the people of the book in an unprecedented manner.
Now this is where immediately the video starts taking a turn for the worst. Now Muslims, when we heard him speaking truth to falsehood and we saw that he seemed inclined to many Islamic values and teachings, this gave us hope that he would embrace Islam. Not because we need him to embrace Islam, but because when we see somebody speaking truth, they seem to be genuine, they seem to be open to the truth, we want them to embrace Islam for their own good. But what he mentions in the very beginning is the Abraham Accords, which was very strange. Why is he even bringing that up? Well, this sets the tone for the rest of the video. The Abraham Accords are a series of treaties normalizing diplomatic relations between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco, facilitated by the US administration. Now, I'm not going to make this video about Israel and Palestine. I'm not going to make it about the Abraham Accords. But the fact that he mentioned this in the very beginning of the video shows his worldview. When he's talking about peace between Jews, Christians, and Muslims, he's not talking about Christians and Jews stopping what they're doing in Palestine. He's talking about Muslims supporting what they're doing. This is something that's very important for everyone to understand regarding Jordan Peterson's perspective and his tone for the remainder of this video. And as we'll see in the next clip, Jordan Peterson becomes so incredibly condescending, it's hard to even believe he would speak to his Muslim audience with this tone.
And finally, for an intellectual of your caliber, your video was malicious and incredibly ignorant. And all due respect, I'd rather learn how to achieve world peace from the creator of the world rather than a clinical psychologist that has failed to do his research on the subject matter.
This suggests the Israel lobby has got to him, the same way it often gets to those with significant Muslim audiences, like it did when it co-opted Sheikh Yusuf Hamza and when it infiltrated the Council on American Islamic Relations to spy on American Muslims. This is what Israel does. And now we have Peterson parroting pro-Israel talking points on the Abraham Accords, which he praises for advancing peace. But this is total nonsense. Life has spiraled downwards for Palestinians since Arab governments betrayed them in signing the Abraham Accords 2 years ago. Israeli forces have since carried out violent and deadly raids on Palestinian worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque, bombed Gaza relentlessly, killing 260 people, including 67 children, in a single 11-day period last year. Entire Palestinian families are being violently expelled from their homes in occupied Jerusalem and the West Bank, while settler terrorist attacks increase in both frequency and ferocity. How can any Muslim in good conscience make a pen pal with Jews that are stealing their land and homes and bombing them in steel cages?
And you are all threatened, in a very real sense, by the system of vengeful Luciferian ideas that currently confronts all that is transcendent, traditional, and valuable on the sexual front, on the familial front, on the conceptual front, on the psychological and sociological front, and, in the final analysis, on the theological front.
All right, so I truly do appreciate Jordan Peterson's eloquence. However, for the sake of clarity, I really just want to cut to the chase here. This video is associated with the Daily Wire, which is a right-wing conservative media company founded by Ben Shapiro, who is a Zionist Jew. When Jordan Peterson is warning against these Luciferian ideas that are against all that is traditional, he is alluding to the political left. But you see, what has happened in recent history is that even though, as Jordan Peterson is so eloquently saying in this video, Muslims have so much in common with Jews and Christians, but the right demonized Muslims so much that regardless of that fact, many Muslims in recent times have aligned with the left. So even though nowadays so much of the rhetoric and ideology that the left is pushing is completely contrary to Islam, it's completely contrary to traditional religious values, many Muslims were hungering so much for some level of acceptance that they flocked to the left. That's how bad Muslims were treated by the right. And now here Jordan Peterson is lecturing us about how much we have in common. Yeah, we know that. Why don't you go lecture your conservative Christian and Jewish buddies at the Daily Wire? How about you guys focus on how much we have in common and spread that to everyone so that Muslims aren't in such fear for their lives, literally, that they will go and side with the left?
There's a couple of things that I think Dr. Peterson got wrong in his message. And firstly, I think he seems to have this false assumption, or he's promoting a false narrative, or at least implying it, that Muslims somehow specifically hate Jews more than Christians, more than anyone else.
Maybe reach out tentatively to a Christian, or even, heaven forbid, a Jew.
Most Muslims that I know do not hate Jews specifically. Most Muslims are in opposition to extreme Zionism that dictates most of the actions of the Israeli state these days, as well as the unfair persecution of many Palestinian citizens that comes along with that. Of course, there's no mention of that in his video. He just seems to incorrectly lump our dislike for Zionism with somehow hating every Jew that there is. We don't hate Jews, we dislike injustice. And that's reminiscent of what's wrong with his message in general. He's chosen to ignore the wider geopolitical basis for the divisions between us and has instead chosen to paint it as, you don't like each other, now like each other.
So his main point in this video is predicated on this point.
It is time for those of you in the Muslim world to stop fighting among yourselves, you Shiites and Sunnis, and also time to stop regarding the Christians, and even more specifically, the Jews, as your enemies.
And most of us know that have ever attended a Jummah khutbah, this is something which is talked about very often, mate. And the average lay people do work towards this. I mean, just look at the Muslims that are living amicably in non-Muslim lands. But he fails to mention the role of the media and the government in stoking tensions between groups. I mean, Georgia State University said that a Muslim terrorist is mentioned 4.5 times more than a terrorist from another religion. That being said, anytime there is bridge building amongst different faiths, it doesn't sell newspapers, so it doesn't get mentioned. And let's not forget the role of governments, especially Western nations. I mean, since World War II, the US has interfered in over 30 different countries, mate.
I have compiled a list since the Second World War of more than 50 governments the US has attempted to overthrow.
and mostly because of their obsession with natural resources.
We've secured the oil, and therefore a small number of U.S. troops will remain in the area.
You can read Economic Hitman by John Perkins and Secret Affairs by Mark Curtis.
First and foremost, point number one. Are you shocked that he said that? I'm not. Why am I not shocked? Because he's not a Muslim. He's had a lot of success. Do you think he doesn't have an ego? That he will come and propose the solution, that he can be the savior, Jesus Christ, for the Muslims? Of course, I'm not shocked. Like, I don't know. I don't understand why these brothers are shocked. I don't understand the thumbnails. I don't understand why everyone's like, oh my God. This is the problem with us today. We're suffering from this inferiority complex. And we put our eggs in one basket. We put our hopes, out of all people, into non-Muslims. You know, oh, there's a new study. The non-Muslims have discovered that fasting twice a week will help fight dementia. Oh my God. The Quran is the truth. Allahu Akbar. Everyone's happy. Finally, their iman is boosted because the non-Muslims have confirmed that fasting twice a week can help fight dementia. It's a true study, by the way.
If you like our content, then make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for latest updates.